Hello and welcome to the first episode of Riverside Tales, a podcast brought to you by the Wildlife Association of South India. WASI, as we're affectionately called, is a not-for-profit society that is engaged in conservation across the mighty Kaveri River basin. I'm your host Mario Jerome, and on this channel, we bring you stories of real experiences from real people about India's fabulous waterways and the rich wildlife they sustain. Our first story takes us back to the 1960s, when a reputed hunter met a tigress and her cubs in the forests of South India. This was a different encounter than the ones that he had previously had, and one that may have changed the way he looked at the jungle and hunting forever. Androcles in the 20th Century by Wing Commander J. Fermie. It was in early November 1963, while attending the Defense Services Staff College at Wellington, that I came across the injured tigress and her two cubs. I was down at Mavanhalla on a short holiday, and before going back up the hill, I had planned to shoot wild boar for a barbecue we were laying on back at the college. All morning we had trekked through the long grass. Boar usually hole up in this after the night's rooting. My eyes are not as keen as those of my Kurumba trackers, but after many years of hunting in our jungles, they had been as well trained as those of most of the junglewalas. As such, I was always on the watch for the new, the different, and the strange. She was lying with her cubs about 30 yards away, in a rough sort of nest near a pile of boulders. A few tufts of brush offered some slight protection from the sun and did very little to camouflage her against discovery. Not that anything would have attacked the tigress, perhaps, but she had taken advantage of the only cover available. The situation was decidedly a dangerous one, and by all norms, we should have beaten a hasty retreat. But something was wrong about the whole setting. What it was, I could not tell, and against my better judgment, I stopped to look. There was nothing majestic about her. She was gaunt and weather-beaten. She rose painfully and looked at me, snarling loudly. I raised my rifle, for with cubs near her, I knew she would show fight to the very end. Now I knew what was wrong. She stood on 3 legs. One of her paws was badly mangled. On the previous day, about a mile to the west of our camp, I had found a rusty gin trap which had been sprung. It had a few strands of skin and hair adhering to the teeth in the jaws. On inquiry, I was told that the owner of the banana plantation at Valaitottu, a small hamlet on the banks of the Segur River, had set it to trap a marauding panther which had escaped. Here was proof that the animal that had been caught in the trap and escaped was no goat-lifting panther. I could see naked bones where her paws joined her leg. I could only hope that her cleansing tongue kept it free of infection. A cat is her own best doctor. She had evidently been starving for days. I read this in the gauntness of the tigress's body and in the puny wail of her cubs. She was starving and dying of thirst. She had nothing to pass on to her 2 babies except courage. She would have flung herself at anything that came close, even though she fell and expired in pitiful mid-leap. The cubs, whimpering, I was close enough to hear them plainly, tried to reach her flabby dugs. She turned and looked down at them, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. She could give them nothing. But if ever a mother of any creature showed yearning and forgetfulness of self in the look she turned upon her starving cubs, that tigress did. I could not offer her any consolation, as she would never know that I was only trying to be friendly. Too many of my kind had slain too many of her kind. The smell of man was the smell of danger where nothing else was, to the queen of the jungle. But I could still do something to help. We had the wild boar that I had shot earlier, and I could always shoot something to eat before dark. If there was not enough to take back, it did not matter just then. I had the boar carried to a hollow about 50 feet away, where it was in plain sight of her. She snarled at us but was instantly conscious of the meat. She needed water too. Maybe, in her dumb way, she had been wishing, praying, if you like, for something like this to happen to her. Anything that would bring water and meat, which she might pass on in her milk to her babies. They were obviously her only concern. Without them, she would have died calmly, without whatever complaint tigresses might be expected to make. I cut away the upper half of a plastic water carrier which we had with us, and placed it next to the boar. We walked away, stopped, and looked back. We had scarcely covered 50 yards when she began dragging herself to the food and drink. Her cubs started to follow and fell over on their thin little sides, which should have been puppy belly fat. She turned her head and told them plainly to stay where they were, until she studied the situation. She took the water first in great noisy gulps. As she did so, she moved her nose around it, gloating over it and watching us with one hostile eye. She was not yet thankful. She was merely receiving her due and not enough of it. But it hit the right spot. She finished the water. We could see her sides bellow in and out as though every pore of her insides was gulping in its turn. Then she fell to on the dead boar. When she had taken a few bites, she hobbled back to her babies and probably told them to have a little patience and the world would be all right again. Whatever she said to them, she did go back to them before sating her hunger. The next morning at dawn, I shot a small boar. The sounder were returning from a ragi field adjoining the Westbury coffee estate where I was camped. I went back with 3 of my Karumba trackers with more meat and drink. Did I imagine it, or did she snarl with less fury this time? Perhaps it was my imagination, but I thought she looked happier. There was something more nearly alive about her pelt. The cubs were still thin, but better natured and not as pitiful as yesterday. I felt very satisfied about it. She stood up and watched the proceedings. More meat, more water. This time, we did not walk so far away before stopping, and she did not look at us so suspiciously. I doubt if she, as yet, had completely connected us with her food and water windfall. But she would, if we gave her time. She came down as before, scarcely waiting for us to move away. It gave me a warm feeling to know we were saving the cubs, if not the mother. There was no telling what would happen to her if her foot did not mend. She held it as gingerly as before. I came again the next day with 2 other trackers, carrying meat and water, and she was waiting for us on the path. In her own way, she was keeping a light in the window to guide us to her home and babies. Today, she had not snarled. She had, I feel, at last connected us with the largesse. We had bought her forbearance. The cubs could stand now and they growled with kittenish ferocity. Her bad foot was apparently healing, and I had to go back. As we walked away, she looked after us. The cubs looked too, trying to stand as they probably imagined their father stood when he wanted to look his regal best. Again, perhaps it was imagination, but I thought she watched us out of sight this time, before she bent to her food and water. I had the feeling she knew I was saying goodbye, in a language she could feel but not understand. When morning came without our visit, she would be forced to go hunting with that bad foot of hers. I have had the feeling since that time that she managed somehow. Even after that, I have hesitated. always perhaps a bit too long, to draw a bead on any tiger or tigress in that area. I should hate to feel that I had unwittingly shot a member of that gallant little family, even in the interests of mankind. We hope you enjoyed that story. Thank you for listening in to the very first episode of Riverside Tales. Don't forget to tune in every first Saturday of the month for our next installment. This series is brought to you by Vasi as part of their Golden Jubilee celebrations. To learn more about Vasi's conservation work in the Kaveri Basin, do visit and subscribe to Vasi's website, Instagram, and Facebook pages. If you liked what you heard today, please do follow the podcast. Give us a like or a quick review, and do share the podcast with your friends. From me, Mario, and our producer Arvind Raj, a very goodbye until the next episode.